And he should be,
Guys,
but,
take notes, wander.
so he ships out June 5th.
She was June 25th, but not anymore. Now I have two in college.
I know, yay!
All right, folks, we can go ahead and get started. Thank you for everyone for coming. I was thinking we go through, we have some procedural things from the city's perspective that we have to go through. But we could start with some introductions. I'm Scott Fulton, I'm the Director of Planning.
Amy Hoofler, I just introduced myself. Amy Hoofler.
Yeah, I'm Bart Whaler, resident and owner of a business here in town.
Brenda Sams, resident.
Marty Dahlman, resident.
Joe Flegel, resident and business owner in town.
Richard Wand, resident.
I'm Aaron Dominy with OHM Advisors, your master on the journey here, wagon master. And Alyssa and Connor are with me as well from OHM.
So, from the city's perspective, this is an ad hoc committee, and as part of the requirements for an ad hoc committee, we have to pick a chairperson, vice chairperson, and a secretary. So this is legally, we're checking some boxes, so I will entertain any nominations for chairperson.
We should make it clear that doesn't come with any extra responsibility.
Correct. It's no extra responsibility. It's
Unless
not
you
like-
wanna make it.
Because I don't nominate you as secretary.
Hell no, I do not take good notes.
I don't either.
But we have, everything's
He's
being
got
recorded.
Recorded.
If I can, just real quick, BJ King, City Administrator, I think I know most of you. There is another member, Ann Walther, who will be on here. She is out of the country, I believe, currently, so she was unable to make it tonight, but she will be joining us, so we'll be a board of 7 moving forward.
So can we nominate her for
Yes.
president,
Yeah.
vice president,
There
and
you go.
secretary?
That's exactly how it goes.
There are,
Sure of
there's
that?
one member not here.
So do we have any nominations for chairperson? Essentially from this is like I mentioned, we have a legal requirement to elect these positions. I don't foresee it coming with any added responsibility. It's like I'll be assisting from a staff standpoint, so anything that comes up, it'll likely be me helping you out, but we do need to get these positions filled to make sure we are legal. So it's anybody.
So, no responsibility, gotta check the box, just to make clear.
I'll do one of them, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'll do one.
Okay.
I don't have to
Well, I
write
can do one
anything
too,
down.
so you guys make a decision who you want.
I think we should go in order of nominations, so chair, vice chair.
Perfect.
There's no writing down of anything, correct?
No, we got that.
Everything's being recorded.
Alright.
So, it sounds like Mr. Wanford made the motion to become vice chairperson. Do we have anybody to make a second?
Second.
Awesome.
Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Flegel,
Yes.
Ms. Sams,
Yes.
Ms. Hooverler,
Yes.
Mr. Dolman,
Yes.
Mr. Weiler,
Yes.
Mr. Wan.
Is that one for me?
Yes.
Abstain.
All right. Perfect. So, vice chairperson, if we were going in order, was it Ms. Hooverler?
Oh, yeah, let's make Bart the secretary. It doesn't make a difference. Bart said first.
Is it part or
Doesn't make
part?
a difference.
Bart with a T.
Gotcha.
So, Ms. Hooverler for vice chairperson?
Second.
All right. All right. Mr. Flegel?
Yes.
Ms. Sams?
Yes.
Ms. Hooverler?
Abstain.
Mr. Dolman?
Yes.
Mr. Weiler?
Yes.
Mr. Wan?
Yes.
All right, and then I think it was Mr. Weiler for a motion for secretary. Do I have a
Second.
second? Mr. Flegel?
Yes.
Ms. Sams?
Yes.
Ms. Hooverler?
Yes.
Mr. Dolman?
Yes.
Mr. Weiler?
Abstain.
Mr. Wan?
Yes.
All right, we are official. I will turn it over
Nice.
to Aaron.
Welcome, everybody. Aaron Dominy with OHM Advisors. We've been selected and retained to help your community put together this comprehensive plan. And this group was assembled to help us essentially craft the plan. I'll explain a little bit more about who we are, but as far in terms of you guys, you're really the folks with the intuitive knowledge. You live here, you work here, you play here. Some of you may have lived here your whole life. And our team, we don't pretend to know who you are and exactly what your issues are, what your needs are, where you wanna go. We do know you pretty well because we're right here in Central Ohio and we're working in almost every community around you. But it's important that you're here to make the decisions and ultimately craft this plan with us. So I said kind of the wagon master because my job is really just to feed this group information and facilitate the process. But at no point is OHM going to come in and say, this is what you're going to do. We're going to present you with scenarios, we're going to present you with information to make informed decisions and to lead a process. I understand there's, as a community, there's some things that are, you know, pretty kind of top of mind, if you will. And so part of our job is to be that neutral facilitator, which is really important. Sometimes you get into this kind of stuff. I live in Worthington, and there's a lot of things that are happening there that, you know, internally be really hard to facilitate. And I think as a community, this is one of those things. It's really nice to have the outside counsel to help you put this plan together. Not only in terms of the facilitation, but then our other job is obviously to be the technical expert. So to provide you with all the maps, all the data, all the things you need to make an informed decision and gather input from this community as part of the process. So a little bit in terms of who we are architects, engineers, and planners. I'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation. Company's been around 60 years. We were a firm in Central Ohio for about 25, 30 years, and we were acquired by a bigger firm. So in Central Ohio, we've been here about 30 years. I live in Worthington. I've worked in Reynoldsburg, where I was the planning director for a short amount of time. As a firm, we're doing Reynoldsburg Plan, Gahanna. We've worked in New Albany for a long time. If you've been downtown Newark and see everything that's going on there recently, we were heavily involved there. So we're pretty familiar with this place, and I think that's one reason we were asked to be here. So you don't have somebody from Washington, D.C. or Indianapolis coming and trying to do this. We have a pretty good idea who you are, and I have family here. So I have in-laws that live right here in Pataskala. And so I have somewhat a vested interest, not like you guys, but somewhat. So this is really a journey, and like every good bumper sticker says, you know, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey that we're going to go on together, which will last 7 to 9 months, depending on how quickly, how efficient we are, and how we stay to our schedule. And, you know, today is really the kickoff of the journey. And so we come in and there's this big aha already. It's really, we want to get you guys comfortable with what's happening, what your role is, how we're going to go about this work. Might be helpful actually if you move over there because I'm going to be talking here. And so I'll do a fair amount of talking today, maybe half the time, and then the other half the time we're going to listen to you guys. And I find that when you go into a process like this, and for your community, it's kind of a big deal when you haven't done one of these in a long time. And as a community, you have a chance to come together and talk about some of these issues that at the beginning, it's really nice just to kind of get stuff out on the table. You know, what's on your mind? And so we're going to ask you what's on your mind and ultimately ask you, what do you want to get out of this process? Because one thing that is true about initiatives like this or comprehensive plans is they don't all look the same. So some have a more heavy focus in one area versus another area. For example, Gahanna right now, pretty built out, right? So their plan's much more surgical. They're much more specific in certain areas where you guys are really unlike any other Central Ohio community in many ways. We'll show you some data here, but you have more ground that's kind of undeveloped than pretty much anybody going around the belt. And so your conversations will be different, and your plan's going to look different because of that. So this group and these meetings, while we had that extremely formal beginning, it's really intended to be just a working group and conversational. So if I'm talking at any point in time, interrupt me. We can have conversations at the table. This looks like a pretty nice group. Now we don't have to worry about people tripping over each other or not respecting each other. That's the big one, right? All ideas count here, and we need to respect each other in this group. So I'm going to kind of kick us off and go through what we're going to be doing today. The first one is introductions, which we did. We'll talk about what is a comprehensive plan. Has anybody here been through an initiative like this? You have?
With that, I was on their Economic Development Committee when we did the Aetna plan, actually. I was a resident of Aetna at that
Okay.
point, so.
Okay. Anybody else been part of a community planning effort like this?
Not community.
No? Okay. So one thing I want to do is kind of talk about what is the plan, how do you use it, why do you need it. Interesting to point out right now in this region, Worthington's about to start one, Gehanna has one going, Reynoldsburg has one going, Whitehall has one going. Hilliard did theirs about 7 years ago. Dublin just plans because that's what they do all the time. So pretty much every community around you is doing this. Newark just finished their vision plan. New Albany is about the most planned place in all of Central Ohio. We're all leaving before Dublin. And so it's kind of like, kind of time for you guys, I think, to pull together and think about this. And the reason I think that's so important is that as a community, this process and this document will allow you to be proactive versus reactive. Meaning, every time somebody comes forward with an application or a policy idea or development, you have a blueprint from how you're making those decisions. Otherwise, you don't know what you're building, right? You're just reacting to all that stuff. That's not a place you want to be. I'll talk about how we're going to go through this planning process, our approach, and then what I find helpful and our team finds helpful at the beginning is just to start to put some water in your cup. And so we want to talk a little bit about national and regional trends. Some of those regional trends are extremely important to you. Anybody following the Insight 2050 stuff other than you two guys? So there's a huge planning process that's been going on in Central Ohio, looking at what's happening in this region. And it's pretty crazy what's about to happen here. So we're about to experience, as a region, 25% growth. And if you look at the state as a whole, we're about 3-4% growth rate in Ohio. But if you take Central Ohio out, we're like negative, we're like neutral or negative. This region's carrying the bulk of growth in Ohio. So part of what we're going to ask ourselves is, what's your role in that? We'll do some preliminary existing conditions, so we'll talk to you a little bit about what we see here right now. The next meeting will be a lot more of that. And then there's a group activity, and then we pretty much wrap up. I'll ask you for some nominations, and that'll make more sense when we get there. And I apologize, we didn't know it was going to be a huge Ohio sports night tonight. I think Blue Jackets are in the final game. I think the Cavs are playing as well.
Cavs played last night.
Yeah, they're
You're not a Cavs fan, are you?
Not really.
they were listening.
The crew played Saturday night.
Well,
too,
let's
too. I
hope
can
it's
tell you
not the
that.
final game for the Blue Jackets.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought the
40
Cavs played.
minutes
They did
in
win
there,
last night,
oh,
right?
yeah.
They did.
104 or something?
Uh-huh.
I checked mine. All right. So I talked about who we are. One of the things that I also wanted to mention is we're going to be pulling these disciplines all together through this. So if there's really technical stuff we need to look at, we have the engineering base, we have the architecture base, the planning and urban design base. So we're pretty proud that we take that holistic look at what we do. One of the things I want to do, just to kind of start the conversation, so I'm not talking the whole time, is answer this question. What is your favorite thing about Pataskala? And then describe 3 qualities of your favorite place. So meaning, when you think of your favorite place, what does that look like? Okay? This is an easy question, not as hard as who's our chair. That was the hard one.
No.
So I'm gonna start with you. What's your favorite thing about Pataskala? And then when you think about your favorite place, what does that look like?
Well, I moved to Pataskala, I was 2 streets over and outside of Pataskala for 14 years and then moved into Pataskala. And I think the reason that we did that is because it was the best bang for the buck. As far as the schools, the school taxes, the city taxes, stuff like that, for what you get for it, it was the best bang for the buck in my opinion, in the entire Central Ohio area. When you consider the quality of the schools, the city, the offerings of the city, and everything else for what you pay for.
Okay. When you think of one of your favorite places, what does it look like? A couple qualities of that. Safe, walkable.
Yeah, I mean,
what is it for those things?
you want something you feel like you could go anywhere you want to go. Well, you said likable. So, I think the parks here, there's multiple parks scattered throughout the city. You're never more than 5 minutes from a decent park in the city of Pataskala. So I think that's a plus.
Okay.
Favorite thing about Pataskala isn't about the city, but it's about the people. Mainly my family's all here.
Okay.
And I know like probably 90% of the people in this room,
Mm-hmm.
So, although that's changing, and plus Pataskala's as you mentioned, a huge land mass, so
Mm-hmm.
that's starting to go away some. That's my favorite thing about Pataskala. My favorite places, if I were to create a favorite city, would have better, not better, shouldn't say that. I prefer flowing traffic, I prefer roundabouts, I like walk paths, like be able to bike places and walk to places that have a destination instead of just a bike path that starts here and ends there, which there was nothing really in between except my neighborhood, because the neighborhood has a bike path, but so something that has a lot more, keeps you here to play. You talk about play here, I don't play here much. Needs to have more things to be able to do within the city.
Okay.
I guess my favorite thing about Pataska is just a rural setting. I mean, I grew up on that's really the reason. I moved here 18 years ago to start a business and to relocate, and I grew up on a farm, and it was just, I just liked the setting and the community that Pataska was at the time, and, you know, still is somewhat kept its identity, and I think that's important for Pataska to have that identity. What's the other question?
What's your, describe your favorite place, qualities of your favorite and your favorite places?
Well, I think, you know, is you know, obviously keeping that identity but having some planned growth. Obviously, we have to be able to survive as a community. You can't put all the burden on the taxpayers. You have to have some balance, and I think that's what's, you know, great about this process is to, you know, to create a plan to be able to you know, plan for the growth that's going to be coming.
Yeah. That's cool.
Real similar, small town, rural area, but accessibility, access, whether it's 70 or 161, to Columbus area or other parts of Licking County. I like the ruralness of Licking County. Big outdoor person, you know, the parks, the bike paths, the trails, even, you know, restaurants or businesses that have outdoor areas to sit and eat dinner type thing, so.
What about one of your favorite places? Doesn't have to be in Pataska, by the way. It can be anywhere. That's kind of the point of the question. You guys all went back to Pataska. We
Yeah.
really like it here.
Yeah.
I'm an outdoors person, so anything like the Smokies where I can get out and do anything outdoors, you know. You know, I don't stay here, you know. I have the fortune to have the trails behind my house to the Foundation Park, which I love. But, you know, I go to Columbus Metro Parks or Licking Park District to do hiking or workshops, do a lot of workshops, you know. So, you know, somewhere that connects or partners with different organizations to maybe provide those workshops,
Yes.
to have different activities here locally, so I don't have to go away to do that. So.
Okay. Marty, right?
Yeah, I came here 40 years ago because I worked here and I felt like I lived where I worked. And so I guess the quality of this place is the fact that, kind of like Ann was saying, that you're at a point where you can still know a lot of people. You know, whether you're walking in the store or walking in the bank or whatever, you know that a lot of the people you're talking to, you're not really dealing with strangers very often. I don't want that to sound wrong. I mean, I don't mind dealing with strangers, but it's nice to be able to walk in.
Sure.
And, you know, they're not gonna say, we need to see your ID to do this because I had you in school 20 years ago. You know, all that stuff. So, you know, that part makes Pataska very comfortable. And even though that has changed significantly over the past 40 years, it's still that way. It still feels that way a lot. Yeah, you screwed me up with my favorite place.
Where'd you just come from?
Well, yeah, that was fun, but that's not my favorite
Okay.
place. No, I mean, I you know, I like being here. I like being in this town. I like the fact that you can be in a town that's close to the city, but you can also be in a town that you can, in other years, I could have, you know, run for 15 minutes and I'd be out in the countryside. Not so much right now.
Right.
But, you know, that was kind of a nice contrast. So, you know, this being kind of on the edge of being in the city, whatever, exurban is the right word, I guess, in the city, but just on the edge of the countryside, so you can get to the countryside very quickly. That makes it very nice. So that's kind of one of the favorite places here, was here, for that reason.
Nice. Joe?
Yeah. The same thing, the closeness of the people, the community, that you get to know people, but, favorite place would be places like Newark and other cities like that, to have a square that's a point of a gathering place for people to come to, and for the city to have events throughout the whole year.
Do you feel like you have a center here?
Not really.
Okay.
I know we've tried to do some things with where the farmer's market and that, but there really isn't a
Yeah.
place, not really.
Yeah. Have you seen the stuff in Newark, the other new farmers market and everything? Pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that helps me just to get to know you guys a little bit better, so I'm not talking the whole time. So I'll talk some more now. It's really about what the comprehensive plan is. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about here, but in very simple terms, I mean, it's really the blueprint for the next 10 to 20 years. That's typically the horizon. 20 is pushing it, 10 to 15 is probably that sweet spot for how long you're looking out. Some plans look 50 years, but I say, in 50 years, we're not going to know where we're going to be. The world's changing so fast. So I think for this community, I would say about 10 years, maybe 15, and then you probably time to update it again. So that's how far out we're looking in terms of creating this blueprint. And from the blueprint perspective, it really is the document that guides what it is you're building, where stuff is going. So from a land use perspective, where do you want to see different land uses? From an infrastructure side, how does that mesh up with those land uses? Where do the centers need to be? Where do you want to see other nodes? I mean, you're so big that, like in all likelihood, there's going to be other pockets where you want to create some activity versus one, for convenience purposes. So as your leadership on council, your staff are making informed decisions every year, from a capital improvements to zoning, all those things are lining up to create your vision. So we're going to create the vision, and then we're going to build the blocks beneath it that are going to hold it up. And that's really what this document is. We'll talk about places where you work. So where you work now, and then in the future, where do you want to be working? Or where do you want to have people working in this community?
Sorry.
Where you live. The fun part about that is you always get to hear the person's ringtone.
It wasn't even a ringtone, I don't know what it was.
That's it, that's the loudest ringtone I've
Yeah,
ever
no.
I would even
I
hear
could have
that.
named that too. So where you live, and so I'm gonna talk a lot about this today in terms of what's happening in the market, but you all seem like pretty smart people. But so you know that that dream isn't what everybody's dream is anymore. So the question is, where are the people gonna have housing choices here? Where are they gonna be and what are they gonna look like? So Joe, to your point, where are you doing things like this where you're showing pride? Where do you gather? Everything that you guys talked about as we went around really revolved around the people and coming together. And so that is a very desirable quality of community. That's why I moved to Old Worthington, because I wanted to be on that green. I wanted to see all my neighbors all the time and be part of the stuff that goes on there. And it sounded like you guys all wanted that too, so it's an opportunity to think, okay, where are these places gonna be? Either you have them now or you shape them in the future. Where do you shop? So it could look like Kroger. We could be creating smaller neighborhood nodes where they're more accessible to smaller retail. Could be big stuff. Maybe you're thinking that you want Costco, Sam's here. So those are all the things that you have to think about as a community of how you shop and what are you buying and where are you buying it, and how does it still maintain your quality. So the other key piece of this is, Bart, what you said, right? So this is all a formula we have to get right. Anytime any community is building all residential, it's not going to be working out very good on the financial side, right? Those generally aren't your income generators. So things like this are generating a lot of value, a lot of income to your community, and so they're a necessary part of that recipe. So we've got to think about where are those things going to go and what are they going to look like. It's important to pause and talk about what it is not. What we're not doing is we're not redoing the zoning map right now, meaning when we're done and there's color on a map, it doesn't mean that tomorrow when that plan's adopted, all of a sudden people's rights change. But it does mean if somebody sells their property and a developer gets a hold of it and they wanna come to you to rezone something, in all likelihood, probably part of this yellow area, then you have a plan that says, we want it to be this. That will give your leadership, your staff, the tools to make that informed decision to say, does it line up with our plan? If it doesn't, in all likelihood, you shouldn't be granting that zoning request, right? So that is really important. So as we start to put stuff on a map, what always happens is somebody says, well, that's my house, that's my building. Yes, it doesn't mean you can't keep using it the way you want, but if you wanted to change it, this is how we think that you should be changing it. So in some ways, it does have a fair amount of teeth, but there's still another process to change the zoning. It's not your subdivision regulations, or a budget or capital improvement plan, but this document should really be informing those two things. There's a community nearby you that I work a lot with, and until they had the plan, and maybe you guys have done this, it's like every year council gets together and it's like, well, my ward this and my ward that, and so we're just throwing money around that's all not lining up. And so it's hard to create change when the things just go like that. So this should give us some direction on where we should be investing. You know, where do we want to see trails at? What intersections are we upgrading and why? Because we're going to see new traffic there. So this really should give us some direction on that. And so in simple terms, it's really meant to provide that framework for development, and provide you the implementation tools to start to create change that you want to see. There's essentially 6 basic requirements for creating the comprehensive plan. Ohio is not as specific as other states. Michigan's very strict on what they want to see in there and how often you have to update it. We're looser here in Ohio, but I think that from a basic tenant standpoint, it's intended to be comprehensive and citywide. Long range, I talked about that 10 and 15 year horizon, so that's what we're thinking about for this. It's intended to be general. So we're not going to be saying specifically, we need to be doing this, although in some cases we might. It's intended to be general in nature, focused on physical development. It relates physical design proposals to community goals. So that means when people come with development application, it needs to line up with your goals. And it's a policy document. So when something happens here, and I'm going to keep coming back to the rezonings because I know you've seen a lot of those, and ultimately that's one place this document's being very handy. You have 2 decisions, or 2 points in which you're supposed to make a decision. The first is, does the application line up with our plan, yes or no? The second one is, does it line up with zoning? Those are the only 2 places really you should be going to make decisions as it relates to development. And without this, you're missing one. So it gets really tricky to be able to do things well. And in Ohio, in central Ohio, we don't see this as much as other parts of Ohio, but for example, in northeast Ohio, stuff gets challenged all the time and you can end legal battles. You don't want to end up there. So this document also gives you protection from that, right? So if you say no, if Marty comes in and says, I want to build a skyscraper here, Pataskala is my home, I'm going to put all my chips in the skyscraper, and it's not in line with the comprehensive plan, and he turns around and tries to challenge you, this document shall hold up in court and protect you as a community from the stuff that you want, but more importantly, I think, the stuff maybe you don't want, like Marty's skyscraper. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
With regards to that, how structured is this in such a fashion that if somebody came to us with a really creative, novel idea that would go against this, but everybody sat down and said, that's not a bad idea, we ought to think about something like that. How easy is it for council, for example, or zoning, for example, to negotiate around it?
That's a good question. And when I talked about this being general, you have the flexibility to do that. So as we're writing the goals and we're writing policies in here, those are the types of things we want to be thinking about, so it is somewhat flexible. It's not intended to be a rigid document, but there is that gray area in there where you want to be able to do that.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah, good question. And then from a policy standpoint, we're going to have feasible, specific actions designed to move the plan forward. So in each chapter of this, we're going to have chapters, for example, on land use, housing, mobility. There'll be goals, there'll be actions. The major part of this, that's the most important, is your future land use plan. Your future land use map, that's going to have all the color on it. Then we're going to support that with text and images that says this is what we want in medium density area. This is what we mean. This is how dense it can be. that's really where a lot of this is gonna, let lie and be important. Some more stuff here, not terribly important, I think I've talked about it. One official plan, this should be formally adopted if you're wondering, council, those of you who are here at the end of the day, you need to adopt this if you support where this group went. And it should be available and understandable to the public. If you've seen plans, for those of you over there at council, we don't want to deliver a 200-page thing that nobody's gonna want to look at. We want it to be light, heavy on the graphics, easy to understand, and something that is on these two guys' desk every day, and looking at it, reading it. That's important. We don't want it to get bogged down in planar V's. I'm going to skip over this because I think we're going to get to this when we do issues and opportunities. But one of the questions I want you to be thinking about as I keep going is, what do you want your comprehensive plan to address? Like, what is the things that are most important to you that this plan must consider and it must have in it? So I think we have a worksheet on that in there. I know we have issues.
Opportunities.
Okay, so I was gonna flip chart that, but we'll answer that question. But I wanted to pose it now, be thinking about this as I keep talking, or maybe you've already thought about it. So from how we're gonna put this together, there are 5 phases. We are in phase 1, which is preparing for the plan. So we're talking with staff, we're setting that schedule in there, we put the binders together, we get all this stuff working, gather GIS data, there's all this work that we're doing. And then phase 2 is understanding the context. So we're gonna do a lot of work on your existing conditions. Where have you been, where are you now, where are you going? And kind of present that information back to you. And then phase 3 is listening. So we'll do a series of engagement techniques, which I'll talk about. Public meetings, surveys, small group meetings in this case, to listen more to the community because you're just a small group. At the end of the day, when we get to phase 4, which is developing and testing the plan, we really start to put the framework together. The 2 inputs we're gonna look to make that, to bring that plan together is what we understand about the context and what we heard from the community. Those are the 2 basic ingredients that we're gonna organize that information, put it in front of you. And sometimes we'll take it a step further and say, hey, we saw this information too. These are some draft ideas that we think you should consider. We'll give them to you. So sometimes that's a little bit more effective than just giving you all the raw data. So we'll develop it and then test the plan. So we'll take it back to your leadership as a check-in. Hey, as an update, this is what's happened. This is where we're going. Just wanted to provide you that point of contact, a chance to provide input. We'll go back to the community and test it again, and then finalize and set up for implementation. So we thought that a little bit more detail. These are the things we're doing in phase 1. I talked about mapping data. We're getting other plans and policies that are put together. And here we are at the kickoff meeting. I'm going to put this over here if I can figure it out. So when I talked about the existing conditions, these are the things we're going to look at. Things like community services, mobility, what's going on with the transportation network, what improvements are planned around you, what are planned here, economic development, your downtown, looking at the downtown and from a contextual standpoint. A big part will be demographics and land use. Those are 2 big shifts in topic areas that we want to show you how you're doing it. How much have you grown, as you incorporated, etc. At our next meeting, we're going to present that to you. Anytime you see city assistance, it means I'm working collaboratively with Scott to get some of this stuff done. So we have a teamwork that we're going to be working on here. So a lot of this data that we're pulling, organizing, we're going to be doing with him. Then we have public meeting 1. So one of the nice things we have about this project is the way it's lining up with the seasons. So if we have a festival or something going on here in this community that we can go to and meet people and have an event there, that's better than telling the public to come to this room, because I guarantee you it'll be the same people who come to every meeting. You might get a few stragglers that want to come. So we want to be creative, and we'll talk about how we're going to be creative to reach people. But generally outside the traditional meeting is working best, because people are busy. And if we can meet them where they are, that's helpful. We're going to do some small group meetings. So these are folks that we, outside of this group, that we know we need to talk to, but we don't want them lost at a public meeting. So we'll do a series of 3, 4 groups of 10 and talk to people one-on-one for an hour or 2. And then we'll have a community survey that goes out. So we'll send it to everybody in the entire community. We'll do it online. Hopefully we get a big response. We'll be asking them a series of questions. That survey will be developed with you guys. So part of what you tell us today and from the second meeting, we'll start to craft that survey and share it with you. Putting the plan together is phase 4. So creating the plan framework, which will include goals and objectives for some of the major topics of the plan. Plan strategies, so how we actually get this stuff done and who's gonna do it. Is Bart gonna do it? Marty, Andy, Scott? Who's in charge of that thing? Because we have to have an implementation matrix, an idea when we want these things done, so they're not too broad, right? So build trails, okay, which ones, when are we doing it, how much is it gonna cost? We'll check in with the elected officials, and then phase 5 is kind of wrapping it all up. So you can read what's up there, but essentially, we've taken more input, we've refined it, we've packaged it, and we're wrapped up. So I have that 6 to 8 month period. I don't know where we're gonna be in there, because sometimes you go faster, sometimes you go slower, that's generally where we're at. In your binder, you have that schedule, and we've outlined every date. So I found that helpful, so we don't end the meeting and say, okay, when are we gonna meet again? There's your dates, subject to change, of course, if things come up. And with those binders, as we go through this, I'm gonna be feeding Scott all this information. He's gonna be populating those and giving them back to you. So I've found that it's easier to give them back to us than we give them back to you. Keeps you organized versus a bunch of paper everywhere. If you wanna walk out of here with your binder, that's fine too. Whatever you prefer, but we're gonna try to keep all of us organized with that binder in place. There's the schedule which you have in the engagement. 5 steering committee meetings, stakeholder meetings, 3 of them, 2 public meetings, and an online community survey. That's how we're gonna be listening to the community. And they'll be doing fun stuff like you see up there with maps and activities. We also have a website going, which is on the city's website. So you can go to the city's website, there's a tab there, right Scott? You can click on that. And that's where we're gonna post information about the plan, drafts of the plan. People can provide input in the plan online if they want. So another layer to how we're listening. Any questions for me on what is a plan, what is it not, how are we gonna do this together?
Now, are you guys, when we're going through this process, are we looking at, Etna, Harrison, kind of their land use maps too, to try to blend and are we just only looking at the task?
I think we will consider them and we can present that information to you so that you can see the context around you. And one of the things you might ask us to do in addition to the engagement is one of those small groups might be the leadership in these other jurisdictions to talk to them. That's up to you guys on how you want to handle that. So absolutely you should be considering what they're doing because we want things to line up and make sense, right?
Just have some flow. You don't want
Absolutely.
an inland beside of a housing development or something. I mean, just something that provides some consistency. Planning.
One of the things that we need to talk about as we go is to what level do we want to incorporate them in this process. The collaboration can be a really good thing, but I also know from working on this side of Columbus that sometimes cities and townships aren't always working together well. So I don't know what the history is here, but something to be thinking about. And as we ask you for your nominations later on those stakeholders, you may or may not want to put them down, but put a bug in your ear, think about it. This is a fun part for me. We're a bunch of nerds and we think about this stuff all the time, constantly, about what's happening in the planning space. This is the big one. So Insight 2050 was a project initiated by MORPC to study the region, where we're going the next, through 2050. And what we're projecting is anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million new people in Central Ohio by 2050. So, essentially that's in 30 years. And one of the things that this study did was it presented a series of scenarios to leadership from around the region, mayors, council, development directors, of how do we want to grow if we're going to accommodate that many people. And there was everything from grow as we are to super dense. I think there were 5 of them. And as a region, everybody said, well, we don't like the super dense one, but we do feel like being compact is the right way to grow versus being sprawled out, continuing this pattern. And I think the reason that people said that is that the more stretched out we get, hypothetically, or depending on how you look at it, the more traffic we have, the more infrastructure we have, the more we have to maintain, and the harder it is to be walkable and create all these places like you're saying that you like to be in. And so that's where the region is looking to go. Now there's a new plan which OHM is working on with Morpsey and some other folks from around the country on, okay, let's look at 5 corridors and study those corridors to increase density and mass transit. So that's Cleveland Avenue, it's 33, it's Broad Street, it's Main Street. So this region could have rail, it could have electric bus, and dense corridors where a lot of this growth can be directed. Even if we direct a lot of it there, there's still a lot that's going to happen outside of that area, like in here, or could. So this is a big thing to be considering. I talked about, Central Ohio carrying a lot of that burden in Ohio from growth, and we are. We're really holding up a fair amount of Ohio.
Is that a state initiative, the 20, you said 2050?
2050.
It's
It's a
Morpsey.
state,
It's
Morpsey?
It's Morpsey,
Okay.
Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission.
Yeah.
That's our MPO here, who's initiated that, and that's really their job.
So is there anything coming out of that that has a immediate, I mean, it's 2050, so not really, but anything that has an immediate impact on the Pataskala area, like a second outer belt that might be another 5 miles out or something like that that would come right through the middle of Pataskala? Is there anything like that that we need to be aware of?
Yes, so on this side, whether it's Main or Broad, there is a fair amount of discussion and consideration of doing mass transit connection all the way from New Albany to Newark.
I knew about that one.
Yeah, so that's probably the biggest one. And around that you would logically find pockets of development around those connections. So it's all about connecting the region. And a big part for this region to be thinking about is how we connecting the workforce to centers of employment and getting them there efficiently. So it was a good
Okay.
question.
Just something confusing about that, when you say New Albany to Newark, and then you say Main and Broad, but neither Main nor Broad run that direction, so.
Right,
what
so
does
the
that
Insight
mean?
2050 on Main and Broad stops. There's another look out beyond that.
Oh, it stops what the Franklin County line,
It
is that?
stops in Reynoldsburg.
Okay.
And then on the other side, it stops out by just past the hilltop. So those are kind of the dense inner areas. Going north, it stops up at Bridge Street in Dublin, and then Rickenbacker. Cleveland stops at Polaris. So it's in closer, but there's a look farther out of how we're gonna connect the region beyond even where we're at. So that would be like Newark, Marysville, things like that.
There's been a strong push from the city of Columbus to input high-density housing all along Main Street and Broad Street, all the way out through Roundsburg.
That's part of the Morpsey study.
Yeah, and a lot of the neighborhoods that I'm part of that are on the west side of Pataskala are actively trying to fight that now.
It has the leadership of all the cities there. So, the mayor of Reynoldsburg, Whitehall, their service director, development director are all involved in that initiative. So, the other thing to think about is like what's happening with households. This one may be new information to you, or maybe you're used to seeing these numbers, but from 2010 to 2030, the number of households without children will make up 87% of the gross of households in our MSA, our metropolitan study area. 87% are not people, your traditional households with children living at home.
Just because of the age they are?
A whole host of demographic factors. You have non-traditional families. You have people choosing not to have children, like a lot of my friends. They're waiting longer to have children. So the demographics, right now we're at about, in Ohio, 33% of households with children in Ohio. So that's shrinking, and that's shrinking nationwide. That's just a demographic shift you're seeing from coast to coast. And I think that there's, a lot of things, financial security happening. Those who are growing up and kind of saw the recession are choosing not to buy houses, they're choosing not to have children, they want their freedom. I think that's also a big shift with the millennial generation and how they want to live. So something to be thinking about of all that growth that's happening here, this is one factor that you should be considering. On the other end of the spectrum, right, it's the boomers. So another statistic to think about is between 2010 and 2030, 56% of the growth in the number of households in our MSA will come from seniors. So you have, without children, right? Or at least children living at home. So you have a pretty big component of the market that's non-traditional families with kids living at home. I know some days when my wife and I talk, like today, we wish we would have made a different decision. I say that jokingly, but there's if you guys watch the news and see what's happening demographically, there's a huge shift in this country right now. One of those is this statistic, and the National Association of Realtors also did a study that's supporting this data about where do people want to live. So 56% of Ohioans would like to live in walkable communities. So for me, the downtown Worthington, highly, highly walkable. You talked about walking. It doesn't mean that it has to be dense, right? Dublin in many places is not that dense, but they connected by trails everywhere. You can get everywhere on a trail the way it was developed. The cool thing about where you're at, because you've not developed out, is you have the opportunity to think, is that the pattern I want? And then where am I connecting to? New Albany is probably very similar, right? Just up the road, you see that. So this is where people are demanding to be. The other statistic is less than 20% of Ohioans actually have that option. So there's a huge supply and demand issue there. Changing household structure, so another statistic just on that topic with and without children, but we talked about that. As we talk about these shifts, millennials and aging adults show similar preferences for smaller lot sizes and smaller housing units. Me personally, my family, we live in about 1,200 square feet with 2 kids and 3 dogs, but we live in where we want to live, that dense area. My dad, he's got a house in the Villages now, but he sold his 3,000 square foot house on a golf course up in Toledo. He owned the old fire station in Perrysburg, if you know Perrysburg as a community, converted a flat there and lives there. And so he wanted to be part of that. And so it's not whether you're conservative, which he really is, or liberal, or old, or young. All kinds of peoples are making these choices because it comes back to this lifestyle shift that people are kind of really hungry for. I'll also say for you guys, everything you talked about, the rural nature is something unique, right? There's not, and I've worked in almost every community in Central Ohio, and driving here on Mink Road, this feeling of the small farm that's alive here, there's nothing like that around here. If you go up towards Marysville, you don't see that pattern. If you go up to Delaware, you certainly don't see that pattern of 23. So you have something kind of special here. Maybe you see it a little bit going down 23 south or towards Hocking, but it is a unique thing you have here. So I think part of what you guys are going to have to decide, and it's kind of the elephant in the room, is how are you going to balance these things? How are you going to maintain that rural character that you all love, but still be mindful of these other shifts? Because at the end of the day, if you are from Pataska and you love it here, and all of a sudden you want to downsize or you want your kids to come back, is there an option for them in Pataskala? If you say no, well, one of the things I'll challenge this group is you're saying no to a huge piece of the market. And that can be something that can be dangerous. Right? Because ultimately for the single family product, something that we always think about is you want to have the full spectrum, right? You want to have something people can step up into to maintain value if you're trying to sell your single family house, or step down into and stay in the community. So that spectrum of housing is a really good balance to have as a community. Yeah.
We're going to go through the process of identifying the different types of housing. Obviously, there's a single house. There's, the apartments, the mass housing. You look at retirement. That's really kind of like maybe along the lines of what you're talking there. Some of the retirement houses that, the village, like the villages, or just some of the communities. And maybe they have some, maybe abatements toward the school system, because obviously that's why some retirees like to, live in some of these areas. Are we going to go through some of those out of the box thinking ideas? Because if we can be somewhat unique in this, that, it would certainly bring
We
a
will.
lot more, opportunities to our community.
So there's gonna be a point in this process after phase 3 where in phase 2, we're gonna show you where all your vacant land is, how much of it there is, and I think we have some of that today, and essentially what you can accommodate. It's just business as usual. And then there'll be a point in the process after phase 3 where we come back with you with scenarios, and we'll have pictures of single-family detached, attached, townhomes, village town center, all these different types and how dense they are. And we'll start to present scenarios to you. Okay, if we grow this way, it's gonna look like this. If we grow that way, it's gonna look like this. Those scenarios are gonna be built on what you tell us and what the public tells us, in terms of what they look like. And then you'll be looking at all these things, making trade-offs. So, being the first meeting, there's a lot of setting the stage. So I got asked the group to be patient for just a short time because I know you all wanna get there. You gotta trust the process a little bit, and we'll get there. So some key takeaways just on some of the brief data. With this regional growth, it will bring development pressure. I will bet my entire career on that. I think you're already seeing that. There's a lot of people looking this direction right now. I know the private sectors, you guys probably over there know them, and there's gonna be pressure. Now how you respond to that, I don't know, but it's coming. Household size is decreasing, fact, we know that, okay? These are like findings of fact if I was an attorney. We know that there's an increasing number of senior households, especially in central Ohio, and there's this growing preference for walkable, which is kind of generic, but there's something about that word walkable. It is where you gather, you meet people when you're walking. It's often an authentic place. It feels right, the scale's different. And so there's a lot of people looking to that, right? So whether it's in the village in New Albany, whether it's Grandview, whether it's Worthington, Hilliard, if you've been to Old Hilliard lately, they're focused on that. Almost every community around you, Gahanna created Creekside, which is about to create more of that down there. So a lot of people are thinking about that and how they're responding to that. So some preliminary existing conditions for you. I talked about this growth, and our big job through this whole thing is to consider what your role is going to be in all of that, right? Is it you're just going to plant trees and say, this is us, or don't come in, or you're going to say, no, you have a place here, whoever you are, and this is, if you want that lifestyle, this is where you can choose to find that in Pasco. So population growth from 2000 to 2016, you can see those numbers there. So you added about 5,000 people, which is approximately 49% population growth from 2000 to 2016. That's not insignificant. In terms of some of your characteristics, your 5,900 households, your mean household income, 67,000 per capita, 28. One of the things we'll do moving forward is show you how this compares to communities around you, because it's hard to see some of this as meaningful when it's just in isolation. So we'll put it together with some other communities around you. 7% no high school diploma, so you have pretty high level of educational attainment. And you can see that 33, 31, and 28 from high school, some college, and then bachelor's, grad, or professional degree. Pretty well educated. We looked at your age cohorts. So what's happening here from an age perspective. And the dotted line on the outside represent Licking County comparisons. So where you guys are, we know we could have picked Franklin or Licking because you're kind of riding that line. We picked Licking because I think that's mostly where you reside. And we found some blips in this information where you weren't on the targets, or some places you were over. No surprise where you were over are those places in the child rearing years. So everything you guys talked about of community, school, safe, people recognize that. So you have more demographic, more folks from 35 to 50 in that cohort. And you're losing a lot of the folks, that millennial generation, who are looking for the stuff that I think you admittedly you don't have. And so that's kind of where things are falling there. And then you're a little bit less on the aging population. From your existing housing types, we showed you from 2000 to 2016 what that trend looked like. and then we're showing you compared to the Columbus metropolitan study area. So, no surprise to you, you're exceeding that number compared to the region in one unit detached. So you're at 73.4% of that housing product. And then you dip off on all the other ones. Right? You're dominated by that. You don't have much of anything in the way of attached or multifamily product at all. You're big compared to your neighbors. You have a lot of land mass. With that comes the opportunity for growth, but it also comes with it the responsibility to grow smart. If you don't grow smart, you could end up in a situation where you're left maintaining a lot of infrastructure that you don't want to maintain, and it's costly. And if you can't maintain it, like some communities, things decline, then your quality of life declines and people don't have the services they demand. So our job through this is to really think about those trade-offs so that you can grow smart. Here's your existing zoning map. I think our key focus is really going to be in that yellow area, that agricultural area, and then the RR area, which makes up a fair amount of your total land mass. You just look at the map, you have a lot of it there. And I say that because at the end of the day, I've done this enough times, almost 2 decades, to know that at some point people sell the family farm. It's just a fact, right? There's nobody to pass it down to. Son or daughter live in the short north now. They don't want that dream. And it happens all the time. And so eventually that's going to get sold, and you're going to see pressure for, well, what's going to happen with it now? Either it's going to be developed at 1, 2, 5, 10 acre parcels, or it's going to be done differently. Let's skip over that one. So much of your land use is in agricultural or vacant, classified as vacant by the auditor. So this is auditor data that we look at. And so on the agricultural side, almost 60%, and another 7% on vacant. So 66% of your entire land area, from my perspective, and we'll put another lens on this to say, oh, what's environmentally sensitive or what's wooded. We can start to take that stuff off the table and look at it again. Is stuff that we would typically consider as potential for growth. If you look at the agricultural and vacant land within the city, it is about 18.7 square miles of the 29 square miles. So that's a lot of land area that's just sitting there. And you know, at the end of the day, we can make a decision on how we want to treat that. And some of the ways we will look at it will be from a prime soils. Where are all really good soils? What's wet? What has wetlands on it? What's forested? And then we can start to peel back those layers. And that 18.7 square miles will go down. And we can say those are the areas, for example, we don't want to see development. And then what's left over, we have to decide how we want it to grow, if we want it to grow. This next series of maps is showing you kind of the walkability factor. So how easy is it for you to walk around your city? We do this typically. For you guys, it doesn't look that great because you're so big. So you can see the lighter area is 0 to 10 minute walk, and then all the way to 20-minute walk. Most folks are more than a 20-minute walk to essentially a restaurant or an amenity in the community. So one of the things we think about then, okay, when we see something like that, are there other pockets where you might want to see some restaurants or some, you know, the Crossroads development where you have a CVS or Walgreens, Starbucks, so that you can create places that are walkable? Or does it all have to go out to Broad? Those are things that you'll have to decide. Your schools. So one of the things I learned, because I had lunch with my wife's cousin, we were talking about her kid's school, and they spend 45 minutes every morning shuttling their kids. One's in one school, he's younger, and the daughter goes to another school, so if they take one there, come home, grab the other one, go there, come back, and that's their morning every day. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I do, yeah, I do it every morning.
Yeah.
Not that long, but.
I think it depends on the day. 30 minutes, potentially, driving them around?
20 and a half, yeah, half hour.
Yeah. It's a lot of time,
Yeah.
right? And then otherwise you put them on the bus, and the kid's on the bus for an hour or whatever it is, just going around. So, you know, I would say this is one of your disadvantages, but it's something we need to think about, how we address that going forward. Quality of education, good, but where it's at and how people get there, not so good. So I talked for roughly an hour, set the stage. The next part of our exercise tonight is for me to just listen to you guys. And so you have a form in there that says issues and opportunities. And so what I want you to do is fill that out. I'm gonna get some water, take 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes, fill it out, write very clearly, because we're gonna collect those. And then once you have a chance to fill out that worksheet, we're gonna go around and we're just gonna start sharing as a table and have a conversation about it. So what do you think the current issues are, and what do you think the opportunities are in Pataskala? Is that clock right? I feel like I talked for more than an hour.
You're doing both present and 15 years now?
Yes. Sounded like it was right. You gonna take notes, Todd? I made the switch a couple years ago.
From all caps to,
To all.
oh, to all.
Yeah, right, something like that, yeah. It should be good time,
How are you, Andy? I'm well. How are you today? Yeah, she's enjoying herself. She called me this morning. Said, I'm gonna take a break for about 2 or 3 hours. We've been on the run for a week straight. Well, for her, that's pretty big.
yeah,
And, ferries, and just running around and driving around, and trains and whatever. So, she came back to Aberdeen for 4 days.
Yes.
Took 1 week.
Started the festival.
Thank you.
And that's the only time Toledo?
oh, gosh.
Yeah, they've been up in Scotland, they've been up doing all the locks, so they've been up in Scotland, Inverness, and,
That what they graduated
Williamstown.
You did?
Just running easy,
Oh,
so then they'll go back to Aberdeen, and then they go, they're in Glasgow.
I did not know that.
And they'll go.
I think people in Michigan.
Like a week.
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
It's like there's this migration towards the Canadian college. We got people in UP.
It's about, is it
Um,
about-
Are they reviewed?
Yeah.
They go as far as they
Yeah, they do. Yeah. We hit a 9 iron in Canada.
With the,
We hit a 9 iron in Canada. We were there.
really?
Oh, yeah, it's pretty close.
it's easier to understand.
She keeps. She doing,
What's the history of that
Jesus,
window there?
in convent care or something.
Well, that's just
Or
a,
The window? Yeah.
We've
No,
got a project
that was
here
put in
pretty
because
nice.
our council clerk works back
So
there,
first
so
thing
she's down here all by herself.
Totally emptied out the, well, first of
Put
all,
that in
cleaned
case
a bunch of crap in the fridge.
somebody comes in and they need help.
So she emptied out the fridge, threw out
Just go
everything that
with
we
that.
didn't want.
Gotcha.
Said like, hey, come in my office.
Wiped it
I
all
gotcha.
out, cleaned it all, so it looks like a brand new fridge.
nice.
That was
Interesting thing to ask.
Every day, we found prehistoric food.
I don't know if that the water
in
bill
the
people
ice
in there
melt
one time or
of the freezer
council.
downstairs.
Sure, yeah.
So we totally defrosted that. I ordered half a cow, so I got half a cow coming, so then we'll be able to
Nice.
do something.
Nice.
And,
Anybody check their phone and see what the projected score
I
is?
did, no, score yet.
No score.
They got me in the
Are we
second
doing
period.
double
No, it started
overtime?
at
Is it
7:30.
I thought
The
it
school was
started
overtime?
Did it start at 7:30 or 8?
Something.
7:30.
Candy. So every night we've had.
That's my,
Is this winner takes all the night?
No.
We're down 3-2.
If Washington
So
wins,
Pantry's on the
it's
list.
over.
Okay.
If Washington's
Pantry's
on
on the list, so is
You tell them not a basketball or hockey.
all of the
Sport of choice?
cans.
Soccer,
We're gonna take and
football, skiing.
swap, we're gonna take.
All at the same
She's
time.
gonna
Probably
probably,
not
of course, does.
Well, she does.
But we need a can. Picture of can.
Yeah, 7:48
We're
was
gonna
the
make
first
a database for all the cans of paint.
Oh, they're up on nothing. I thought you said it was
Those are
0
all gonna be
0.
It was until I.
Oh, that's awesome.
Dang.
Yep.
Uh,
So she'll
we're-
have that, and then we're gonna get a
Stop it, just leave it.
It's gonna free up like
Pause
two
time.
I was there
um,
last
storage things.
when the double
We're
overtime.
just, she's so many damn cans.
It's
They're
hard to
from our
watch.
ex-houses. I mean,
And
they
then
live
they
big
love
big
it.
houses.
Awesome. I was
You
the
do
best
that,
sporting
She can't.
all
That's
around,
amazing.
like they appeared
Like,
3.5 hours.
this was
Very intense for 3.5 hours. It was amazing. And then it stopped.
I'm suffocating.
And then it all stops.
Then it
Screeching
just
halt.
like
Skin it.
So, we were outside, we trimmed all those bushes and got all those trimmed back.
Kind of like
Nice.
Sunday. Was that Sunday? No, Saturday afternoon.
And, we're gonna
Went
get
to bed in my
mulch.
house.
We're
You
gonna
can walk
have
away
mulch
from it.
Did get
delivered.
distracted, right, and go,
Yeah.
like, put your energy elsewhere.
That's the key when Ohio State plays.
So
I'm taking a walk.
So we've
And
already,
infested.
So they come back and say, oh my
It's
gosh, we
just-
won. Like that year we beat Michigan, I left. I went down to the soccer field with my son. And I just heard every house around me started screaming.
in the
I was
living
like, God, I ran back home.
room, and it's got
That's funny.
You guys ready to share? You can keep filling that out between now and whenever we stop. We don't have to go to 9, by the
Yeah,
way.
she's like.
I find there's some
Tired.
magic between an hour and a half and
Yeah.
2 hours, 2 hours to.
Well, sure, yeah, that's awesome.
So, if we're done at 8:30, that's fine too.
Um,
We're gonna test Connor's penmanship again. So far, I give him like, you guys, C minus.
Art as a teacher.
He doesn't work with us for his penmanship.
As long as the magic marker isn't bleeding through on the wall, he's good. That would be my first concern.
Yeah.
Then he can paint it.
Good.
Alright, well.
It's not a sharp one.
and you'll earn it, so.
The council seems to.
Right. Work in progress. We'll start with you, Joe. We'll probably go around 2 or 3 times on opportunities and we'll hit issues. And then we'll share one about the future. Where do you, let's start with, what do you want to start with, issues or opportunities?
Sure, issues.
Let's do issues, people like issues.
Just some of the things that, and I don't know if these would be things we'll cover here, but from being on council previously and just seeing things after the merger, it seems like the bridge up on Broad Street divides the city, big time. And we need to find ways to, when people on the other side of the bridge, when they leave their homes, they come east. And when people east go west and have places that we can shop local, do whatever local. I know some of the things, as a business person I dealt with, is that, I talked to somebody, the florist in town, and I talked to people at Licking Heights, and it was back when we had 2 florists here. I said, where do the kids at Licking Heights get their flowers for prom or whatever? They go Roundsburg. Even though the 2 florists here were so much closer than Roundsburg. So to me it was,
Flower-rama.
yeah, so, and then another thing is that when I was on council, I don't know if anybody remembers, but Howard M. Sweller's property out on 310, where Puerto Vallarta is. Originally, that was planned to be a gathering place. That was the way it is on the side where Puerto Vallarta is and has the right turns in only, and that space there. It was supposed to do that on the other side to bring retail shopping, so you would have a situation like downtown Granville.
Yeah.
And you would have park benches and places for people to sit, but that just never came to
Let's do
fruition.
this, let's share an opportunity, let's everybody do an issue and opportunity together. Is that the opportunity?
Yeah, yeah.
Where's that on the map, Joe? Because I didn't know the history of that.
Yeah, do me.
Where's 310 coming out of town?
Look at that purple
Peter Ditch
right there.
Cecil Tenet Road.
Yeah.
It would be.
It's the PDD right there.
the PDD.
Okay.
Right there, you can see where it comes in and out. We're supposed to do the same thing on that side also.
Okay. Do you guys, let me ask you this question, and I'll go to you, Marty. Do you feel like you have a downtown?
No.
No.
There
I've
is
driven
an
through
old
it.
downtown if you are a Pataskala person, but if you're a Lima Township person, I don't know what you consider downtown. When they merge, there is no heart of the city,
Right.
The downtown is kind of there because of the street pattern.
because it was Pataskala's downtown.
It was the old village
Pataskala
downtown.
and Lima Township were, they merged to become the city of Pataskala.
And I know once.
So it was the downtown for the village.
It was, that's true. And back, way back, when I was on council, to where they were presenting a plan to the people downtown and in the village, because at the time it was the village, to create that downtown atmosphere to be like Westerville or something. And the Licking County was out and had all the business owners and were getting them all pumped and excited about this, and they were gonna do this. And I ended up finally saying in the meeting, I said, what's this gonna cost the business owners? Because they were presenting it from the standpoint that they were gonna get this done for free. And as it turned out, they ended up saying, well, it was gonna cost a lot, and it would be, the business owners would be responsible. At that point, it just fell apart.
Why wasn't the decision made to put the downtown out closer to Broad Street?
The old downtown was there in what year?
Well,
18?
but with the PDD,
Oh, that plan.
yeah, so if you're making that investment, why wasn't there a decision to make it up on Broad, or was it ever talked about?
No, just really a developer, the farmer.
Current property owner came in
He's the
with-
one that came and really came up with the plan. He had the resources to be able to put together something like that, and nobody else really has.
Mark? First an issue, then the opportunity.
I agree with Joe's issue, by the way. Issue I have is there's no alternative for, in this community, to do anything but drive somewhere. I could walk into the downtown area from where I live just down the street here, but other than dropping my car to get it fixed and walking back, there's not a lot of other things to go do down there. Otherwise, anywhere I wanna go, I gotta drive. And more importantly, anywhere a kid wants to go, they've gotta get a ride, because we don't really provide ways for them to get around on bikes and walking and those kind of things. You know, if a kid wants to go to Kroger's, they gotta walk down beside Broad Street. And so,
That's not a fun walk.
no, well, yeah, it's just, yeah, you wouldn't do it, you wouldn't let your kid do it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
and so we don't provide that, and so therefore we don't have a community where, you know, kids are gonna go from, if you get kids who live, even in, besides the whole divided community from the merger, even in just the Pataskala, the village of Pataskala area, the old village of Pataskala area, if you get a kid who lives behind Kroger and a kid who lives in the old village of Pataskala, somebody's gotta drive them from one house to the other for those kids to visit each other. So you don't have ways of connecting kids or for adults to have any other alternative than just jump in a car.
Is there a place that you look to from that walkability standpoint that you think that's what we should achieve, strive to achieve?
I mean, another town, you know, for example, I mean, Granville's done a fairly nice job of doing that, but they're a much more contained town.
Do you think New Albany's walkable?
You know, I haven't spent as much time down there, I mean, no, I don't, you know, I can, Shaker Heights is, have you been in Shaker, you know Shaker Heights?
From Shaker Heights.
Okay, well, my sister lives there and I spent a lot of time, and that's a reasonably walkable place and your people are walking there all the time.
It's dense.
Yeah,
I mean, it's dense. That's
and
the
it is
difference.
very dense, but
Yeah.
it's also got paths, it's also
Yeah.
got parks you know, all the lakes and the parks and those kind of things. So I mean, and I'm not thinking that we're ever gonna be that kind of town, but that would be the kind of thing I would look to that can, you know, like say, if I wanna walk to somebody's house, I can walk.
What
someplace.
about Powell?
Yeah, I don't know what that will, I mean, I don't get out of Jasper.
I just
I
throw
mean,
Powell out there
seriously,
because Powell's kind of one of those places that just kind of gave birth, you know, it just all of a sudden, boom,
Yeah,
and something new. So, what about an opportunity?
well, I think you present us an opportunity, it's a blank slate. You've got, you know, if we decided that we wanna do something big to pull the community together, and it's an infrastructure kind of thing, you're not gonna have to displace too many things or too many people to do it, because you've got 66% of your land that's
Right.
in one form or another not, in use is the wrong word, isn't it? The land may be in use, but it's not
It's not
built
fully,
on.
that's not fully developed.
Yeah, you don't have to move things to get there.
Right.
So I think that's a huge opportunity.
I just hop in, Aaron, for a second. It's interesting you bring up Shaker Heights. I grew up there, left 10, 11 years ago. I didn't think it was walkable at all. It's walkable in that you have the trails and you have all those things, but what we really lacked there was a place to walk to.
Mhm.
We didn't have that downtown, and they have just built the downtown, like from scratch, basically.
Right.
After you left.
After we left, it should be done this year, I mean, more or less, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing that, a community can sort of realize that, hey, we actually don't have a city center, and start to build one from scratch, so.
What was your first name?
Brenda?
Brenda.
One thing was bringing in small businesses. I guess some critical issues are just pulling them in now.
As an issue?
Yes, yeah.
So it's been challenging to bring in small businesses?
From what I hear, just from some folks that have started businesses and stuff, but that's in the last few years. I think there's a lot of opportunity, with downtown area and within the city, so.
Mhm.
I guess, the opportunity is to pull them in. And then if I could I add one thing to like creating a gathering
Yeah.
space? I think it also as an identity for the city. It's a space, but the city needs to create an identity for itself, so.
That's a really good point. I mean, we talked about that when we were interviewing for this, and we were kind of bold, as consultants coming in saying, it's not really there yet. I think you have kind of a default identity that the people are giving you because it's not crystallized.
Because I consider myself a transplant. I came here in 2003, although it's been a while. But I'm continually asked is, where do you live? Which is kind of in center of town. It's like, well, do you go to Newark to do shopping or businesses, or do you go to Reynoldsburg?
That's interesting.
And I mean, it's constant. I mean, even people that, I grew up in Canal Winchester, it's like they ask me that. So there's no identity and no, I guess togetherness or, just to create a community in itself.
From a scale standpoint, Canal's downtown's very, I think, relatable here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that you can strive to achieve. Nice downtown.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up there. I don't want to see, maybe at least this community expand, but I know how, I understand Columbus came in to annex part of it,
Mm-hmm.
and that type of stuff. So it kind of grew in a different area that I would prefer growing up in that community.
Mhm.
But I do like the downtown area. I
Mhm.
like those downtowns to, you have those electric bikes, that you can go in and you go down to Columbus Audubon and you can pick up a little electric bike if you have the connecting pass. And you can go to different areas if you hook into Licking Park District or into New Albany or some of the other connecting trails within Columbus. And you can pick up a little electric car here and go to an area or, and have destinations, I guess,
Okay.
for people that want to get outside of Columbus.
So the opportunity may be for you is the connectivity.
I think on the same, we've kind of talked about a little bit. The biggest issue is just the broad street planning. From a transportation issue, no sidewalks, no crosswalks. It's just, and it's such an opportunity up through there. It's going to eventually have to become 4 lanes. I mean, because we're going to have so many turn lanes in between, it's
Yeah.
obviously going to be 3 lanes with all the development. So I don't know where the funding comes from that. I mean, you could do exactly, I like Granville's, how they run the blacktop walking, biking
Mhm.
paths up the middle. My gosh, you could run that all the way down the side. You streetscape it. I mean, it's visioning, the opportunities that's out there, putting together some type of plan, because I think from what we all live here, and I mean, everybody crosses Broad Street, everybody's on Broad Street at least once a day, at least once a day. It's kinda like right in the middle, and it's what connects everything, it connects our community together is Broad Street. And, you know, by looking at what we have to do, I mean, to kind of, you know, make this a manageable project, you know, that would be the one big impact thing we could do to be able to create some, you know, we create our identity. We wanna, you know, look
Yeah,
at putting
yeah.
together a downtown, heck, right there at city, right here. I mean, this is pretty much in the center of town that way, and then, you know, there's land available on across the street here. There's just so many opportunities, it's right here on Broad Street that, you know, we could be the community, that people can model after instead of talking
That's your,
about.
that's your front door. That's your front door.
Yeah.
Broad Street. What about, that's an opportunity and an issue kind of for you.
Well, yeah, because it's an issue on my top, but it's an opportunity down here. Just Broad Street planning is my number one opportunity, because it is. If you come through this town, if you start, and someone just told me the other day, they used to drive to, into Columbus, right down Broad Street, and there was like 2 traffic lights. It would take them 15 minutes to get into Columbus. Now it takes them 45 minutes, because there's 31 traffic lights all the way into Columbus, so.
I learned that the hard
Yeah.
way when I first paid me, it took me an hour. So I don't count, I
It
came
is,
about
yeah.
161 to Macon down. Yeah.
But we're never gonna get away from that, but what we can do is provide the type of planning to where we don't have a traffic light at every single
Well,
intersection,
maybe most of that
and
traffic's not
you
doing
have
that
some flow.
in the future.
What's that?
Maybe most of the traffic isn't doing the Broad Street move in the future, that our north-south connections get so much better that that's the flow, not people going east-west as much.
Yeah, I don't know. It's-
Well, not to beat a dead horse, but I think we're all on the same page, is there's no center, there's no identity, there's no, what is Pataskala, and that's our issue. We're such a big, huge mass with 2 separate school districts, with this little quadrant right here in the bottom southeast corner being one, and then 75% of the rest of the landmass being something else. But a lot of people in this little section down here. How do you develop that Broad Street corridor to make it Pataskala? And make it all one Pataskala? You can have multiple school districts in a city and still be a city and still be a united city. But how do you do that? I think that's our issue. On the other hand, every single issue we have is also an opportunity. So they go hand in hand. So by having this issue, it gives us, like he said, who said a blank slate? Was that Marty or was, yeah,
Marty.
gives us a blank slate to create what we wanna see here. And build the bridge, not the Broad Street Bridge, but build the bridge between the 2 communities, cause it's really 2 communities we're talking about. 1 city, 2 communities, we gotta bridge the 2 communities together.
The bridge, I have a hard time without the aerial. Is it right here?
Yes.
Right beside, yeah, it's right
Yeah,
under.
very close.
Yeah, I don't know if this is important, but, I mean, I look around this table, and we have 2 distinct communities, but really, 6 of us is representative of the Southwest Licking corridor, and there's only 1
I
that's from
know,
Licking Heights.
It's okay, I'll be loud enough.
And I don't know if it,
That's
you
why I
know,
picked
if we
it.
need to have other representation to be
So
able
help me
to.
understand your geography when you say that. Is that the school district?
School
There's
district.
2 school
Yeah.
districts,
It's
yeah,
the
which
east-
is really our
But
2
it's the
separate.
it's the east-west split in the community as well.
Yeah, I mean, really, that's what we talk about, the separation of this community.
It's right here and then the boat main.
For the most part.
Actually, it's
Marty
still
can
more-
show you
Yeah.
exactly where it
Yeah.
is.
Because we need to understand,
So,
we need to understand the vernacular.
you guys correct me if I'm wrong, Tom. This is basically the Licking Heights School District.
Correct.
Okay, which was the old, before the merger, this was Old Lima Township. And this, including this, is the Southwest Licking School District, which, it doesn't even, you know, that's the old trivia question, what high school is in Pataskala?
Mm-hmm.
And the kids
Yeah.
who live in this area go to a high school that's located in it,
Right.
so.
The largest employer in Pataskala is Licking Heights School District. Yet the majority of kids that actually live in old part of Pataskala
Yeah,
go to Watkins,
okay.
Southwest Licking.
Okay.
And,
Did I pass it on Mink, on the right-hand side?
That's
would have been
Licking
Licking
Heights.
no,
No,
well,
that's
yeah,
nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you went that way. And I guess the thing I've noticed was, in the 40 years I've been this, I moved into this community. In the 40 years I've been here, the communities have been the village, the old village, and then the communities that are revolved around the schools. And the schools have been more the community centers,
Right.
which probably isn't unusual, but in our, you know, I worked in Southwest Licking for 30 whatever years. And there were 7 different municipalities in the school district. And so, and none of those municipalities really had a center, so the school became the center for it. I suspect Licking Heights is pretty much the same way.
Very much. Yep. Split community was at the top of my list because being on the Licking Heights side, I see it all day, every day. My kids have gone through the Licking Heights School District from kindergarten. My second one is a senior this year, and I still have a freshman in the high school. So I am guilty of driving to the Flower-Rama in Reynoldsburg to buy flowers rather than driving into downtown Pataskala. I don't even think about it because I can be in Reynoldsburg in 6 minutes. But to drive all the way out here can actually take a lot longer, and then you struggle to know where to park and all of that kind of good stuff. So I'm guilty as charged of going west instead of going east and coming over the bridge. I think that as I drove up Broad Street today coming here from Taylor Road, and as far as an entryway or an entrance into the city, it's awful. Awful. There's vacant buildings, there's rundown buildings. The shopping that is there looks like it's all just strip malls that were slapped up with there's no consistency to the outside of the
Isn't there a
buildings.
pool store there?
There is,
Yeah.
yeah,
Aquatics.
there's almost as many pool stores there as Columbus has mattress stores on the rest of Broad Street. But there's no consistency. There's, when you jump off the freeway at Route 3 on the north side of town and you turn right into Westerville, you know immediately that you hit Westerville.
Yes.
The brick facades, the entranceways, the welcome to Westerville, the tree-lined streets, there's an image there, there's a perception there, and I don't see any of that in the city of Pataskala.
Your public realm doesn't exude the same sense of pride you have at this table.
Correct. And, as I was driving in today, I mean, I counted no less than, between Taylor Road and here, I counted no less than 6 vacant, rundown buildings that need to be plowed under, cleaned up. I saw no less than 6 or 7 properties along Broad Street that have to have at least a half a dozen zoning violations, I would think. I don't know the zoning code really well, but I mean, it just looks like a mishmash that nobody ever thought about. And that's a lot of people's first impression
Yeah.
when they're coming into our district, into our city, whether it's for sporting events or whatever. The schools are getting bigger, okay? Our schools aren't just playing against Utica and Northridge and Johnstown anymore. They're playing against Worthington, and they're playing against Dublin schools, and they're playing against Grove City, and they're playing against my daughter played a softball game against Piqua the other night. So we're starting to draw in more people from outside of the community, and I look at what they get as their first image of either Southwest Licking or Licking Heights, and it's just not good.
Did you go to Pickwood and play the game?
No,
Because that's another community who's really reinvented themselves.
no, the game was here. As far as opportunities, I think the schools are a huge opportunity for the city. Both the high school level and at the post-high school level. We have a ton of, between Newark and Columbus, we have a ton of post-high school opportunities for kids, so we should be very attractive to businesses that want to find resources to run their companies and stuff like that. I think that's evident by Facebook going in. You know, Facebook's building a huge facility off of 161 and Beach Road, and having spent some time with the development coordinator from the city of New Albany, that's just step one of what's going in over there.
Incredible to be on the doorstep of that for you guys. I mean,
and-
an opportunity to capture it.
And a huge chunk of that is because of the resources that we have sitting directly in between Columbus and Newark. The planning director in New Albany told me that she said in 10 years' time, you'll drive from New Albany to Granville and you won't even realize that you went through a rural area. That the entire 161 corridor in the next 10 years will be filled with industry, housing, everything, all the way across. And it's coming, and if we don't address it now, it's going to steamroll Pataskala and it'll no longer exist anymore. And I don't mean that to sound overly dramatic. I don't think that's overly dramatic. I think it's fairly realistic.
I think you're right.
When I said schools too, the other thing when you talk about a split community, one of the things that I think that can improve that split community is the schools. I was on the Licking Heights School Board for 8 years. One of the things we were talking about internally on the Licking Heights School Board towards the end of my term was whether there should be a Pataskala City Schools. And the two separate school districts should merge. It doesn't mean that it does away with Licking Heights High School and Watkins Memorial High School. It doesn't have to do away with those. It doesn't have to do away with the rivalries at all. But there's things that could be gained by combining the districts and creating a Pataskala City School District and trying to erase some of that split community. Like I said, it was nothing more than internal discussion.
Yeah, that'll be, you look at Dublin, you look at the Dublin schools and all the Dublin schools that they have up there, and you look at, the Pickerington Central and Pickerington.
Yeah.
There's always gonna be that division. I mean, it's just a
Yeah.
competition. Schools
Right.
are a competition.
Yeah, right.
So, you're right, there is an opportunity there, but, it's kind of an issue, but we have to deal with it. Every other community has to deal with it as well. But again, alluding back to your vision of Broad Street coming in, it's bad enough when we have communities and other families and other schools coming in, but when we have economic opportunities coming in, and that's what they see, that's the biggest problem we have, because they will not want to locate in here, especially when we have New Albany doing it the right way, just to the north of us.
Right.
They don't care, money's no object, it's a huge investment, they're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that they're investing. They would and what we will get if we don't change our image, we're gonna get the bottom of the barrel, and we're gonna be just another community that people live here, move here, because it's cheap, and we don't have any other
Here's
resources.
what I see gonna happen, because of what's happening to your north. This will be this is gonna continue to be desirable, because the workforce, the housing, the opportunity to support all that is gonna be here. And so the question is what does that look like, and what level of quality are you gonna expect? Because I think the demand's gonna be here regardless, so you have an opportunity to control that. So we're at an hour and a half. I wanna go off script for a second, because I think this will be kind of fun, because for me, I can see the future a little bit with this group and where we're gonna go. And I just thought it'd be fun to say, I'm gonna do a vote right now. So I think you're talking about all the amenities you want as a community. You wanna be walkable, you wanna have these destinations, you wanna be able to get around, you wanna have a brand, you want it to be quality. But then there's this other half that is, we love our heritage, we love it rural, we love this thing. So there's this push-pull. So at the end of the day, the question is, and we'll get back to this more with images and stuff like that for the future, but I thought it'd be fun just to say today, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being exactly what you are today, almost like no growth, or everything's 10, 20 acre lots, and you just continue that pattern, or a 10 being Dublin and New Albany. Where is Pataskala on that range?
Where is it now, or where do we want it to be?
Where do you want it to be,
Okay.
right? So just write that number. I know this isn't perfect science, but I thought it'd be fun to see what that is.
That's easy.
It's a cop-out.
So
So from the perspective of, cause I can think of 3 or 4 different ways to answer that question.
Just go with your gut. Like, this is not a science, I just thought it'd be fun for a conversation, but if
Okay.
you have point of clarification, I'll be happy to answer how I see the question, so.
How we want it to be.
How you want it to be.
Okay.
Yep. I think Dublin's probably the best example. Because I think Dublin's more built out, more dense than Milton. And they both have a lot of industry going for them, they just make money there.
Right, yeah, exactly. But, I don't know, it's just, they had the right type of growth, the right type of opportunity that came in. They had money.
I was gonna say. We'll do this again later, so I just thought it'd be fun to just see where we're at today.
That's exactly right.
So while we're tallying this up, I know it's late, I don't wanna take this all the way to 2 hours, it's a good conversation, a good start. In your binder, there's another form called stakeholder nominations. So if we talk to 3 to 4 groups of 10 people, tell us what folks we should be talking to. These are people who maybe own a business, have lived here a long time, own a big farm, are on planning commission, maybe it's not a township person. Who are people that you want us to talk to, not just come to a public meeting and their voice is lost, but we're actually take the time to talk to them and have conversations like this. So fill that out, write their name. If you have their contact information, great. If not, Scott and I, and Alyssa and Connor will figure out how to get a hold of them.
So these could be residents,
Yeah.
business owners,
You want this now, or
residents,
can I think
people
about it
with
and then
other
come back in?
organizations.
It's a quintessential stakeholder, somebody who has a vested interest to hear and the ability to transform the future, right? Could be the superintendent, for example, could be the head of the chamber, could be, just people that you think, hey, you gotta talk to this person before we're done with this. Because we'll be doing that in about 2-3 months. Did you get all the papers? You did the math right?
That's-
You have the numbers? That's it?
I was thinking for you.
11 and 12.
Can I think about this and then turn out that good?
Did you put this on? No.
I put Howard, I mean, everybody's gonna put Howard down. Everybody needs to, I mean,
Okay.
but you talk about,
I think this will be fun for your council member who's still here.
Two of them here.
There,
Yeah,
2 of them, 3 of them, there were 3 of them.
yeah.
Melissa said she was sorry she had to go.
Okay.
She had to call in.
I did this activity, it was much more formalized in Farmington, Michigan. They have a great downtown, and there was just this big contingency of, keep it the way it is, it's great here, don't change it. And this was just for their downtown, not for the whole city, just their downtown. And we did this with like 400 people. And maybe it's something we want to do with this community with visual preferencing. We asked them, where are you at on that spectrum? So for you guys, 1 was, looks like it is, we'll keep building out here and there, but it's gonna kind of stay the same. And then the 10 was a Dublin. So you were right here as a group. Pretty interesting, right? So you see the future looking quite different than what it is today. What do you guys think about that number? Yeah.
I think we're realists,
Mhm.
and where I think some people with their heart would have said, yeah, I want it to be a 1, or I want it to go, I think you said 0, move back 20 years, but the reality is, it's coming. So can we control it so it's not crazy?
Anybody higher than that? Anybody write down a number higher than that?
I wrote
I
5
had
down.
8.
8?
I had 7.
5, 7, 8.
I almost put 8.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could be a blend of both,
Yeah.
that's our identity. I mean, that seems like from our community. But I think specific areas, because we're such a large area, I mean, most cities, you could put 4 municipalities in this area, and
They're
anywhere
real,
around Columbus.
like Marty said, we really don't have an option but to change.
Now,
There's no options not to do something different, with the growth that's coming, so.
let me ask you this question. When we do the small group meetings and the public meetings and the online survey, do you think most people will share that sentiment in this community?
It'll be mixed.
That ought
Most
to be a
people?
number.
Hmm.
Well, if you get the farmers in, and not even the farmers, I mean, there's a lot of people that live up in that, up in the ag district where, and, they have 10-acre lots and they're very comfortable, they like that, they don't wanna see anything else around it. But you ask, you know, maybe from the Lima Township, or really that's even part, mostly of Lima Township, but, you know, more of the higher development area of, they'll want that area to become more, you know, maybe higher densely populated.
So as we continue the conversation.
I see both sides
I
right
think
there.
though I think though, there are a lot of people who say they don't wanna see it different, but they want all these things. So the reality of it is they really do want it to change because they wanna have all those other options, all the amenities that we don't have, the walking to a restaurant or a bar, or, you know, things like that, even though they don't want it to change. I think though, if you had a conversation with them and talked with them long enough, they'd say, yeah, I see what you're saying, you know, I think we do need to change in order to move forward.
But, I mean, and we've all heard the same thing. And we deal with this too as business owners, that, you know, we are a bedroom community. Everyone leaves our community every day and they work somewhere else. And it's just that we don't have, one, we don't have the business, we don't have the infrastructure to be able to support businesses coming in. And it's the main vein that goes right through the middle of our city, that it's just exactly what you said. Who's gonna wanna spend, you know, $50 million or $100 million and building a infrastructure, or building a business in this community, in that type of community or that type of environment?
So, you know, at that point, and then to come back to the words I wrote up there, you know, this world of economic development's changed. Facebook isn't in New Albany because they did a map search and they said, well, I mean, we do have a pretty strong workforce in Central Ohio, but, you know, that's where I wanted to be. They created that environment to attract them. Just like you have to create an environment to attract the businesses you want. And back to your point about the gateway coming in off Taylor and Broad, I mean, come and do a site visit, you're like, So we gotta fix that. We gotta create the environment to attract them, both in the stuff underground, but also what is the quality as a community that you exude. And so for us moving forward, it's kind of a good closer, is on this 6.5, as we keep working together, the key two questions we're gonna answer is, where do we wanna see the growth, and how do we wanna see it? So what does that look like? So a great example, I think, of where you're going is in Hilliard. We did the Hilliard Comprehensive Plan. The whole west side of Hilliard's in the Darby Accord. If you're familiar with the Darby Accord, it's a big conservation district that was put in place through a partnership of all these communities to protect the Darby watershed. And they limited how many sewer taps they would allow there, 2,000. That's how many sewer taps they were gonna do. They kind of divvied out the chips. And then the pattern is a conservation pattern. So there was a big project we worked on in Hilliard that was 60% open space, but it had a neutral density. So the whole thing actually has a new metro park, trails, it has apartments, it has 5-acre lots. And it was this pattern that protected the open space, still allowed development to happen, but maintained that pastoral atmosphere. And that will probably be a pattern we're gonna be presenting back to you as a choice. So you can have your cake and eat it too, but the challenge is, as you talk to your constituents, right, the bad thing that everybody always points to that we have to work together on and talk about is that sometimes, in order for you to achieve these things, get dense, have the amenities, protect the open space, there'll be places where we have smaller lots. Because if everybody has 5 or 10 acres, we're toast. That goes back to you can't maintain the infrastructure, you lose your ruralness because it's just all developed. So in some cases, it's okay that those lots are smaller because it means we can protect more open space. So those are all the conversations we're gonna have over the next several months. And I know it seems like there wasn't this climax today, and that wasn't gonna happen in our first hour and a half, 2 hours. But there's a lot of hard conversations we're gonna have like that as we go forward.
Yeah. Now, the way our zoning is created, not everything is 10-acre lots, right? It's just only in the ag district. So it's kind of separated out now the way it is. I mean, just the yellow area is where it's 10-acre lots, but you look in the green area.
Yeah, what is that, is that 1 or 2 acres?
RR's 5, R87's 2, R20's half, then a third, then a fourth, then, geez, Wes.
We didn't even include the RR in our number that wasn't undeveloped, so you're talking a lot of houses,
Right,
if it all got developed.
exactly, yeah.
There's actually already a lot of housing though that's quarter acre and under.
Right, exactly.
What there isn't a lot of is the housing that's third of an acre to maybe a half an acre, and it's between $200,000 and $300,000. At least on the west side of Pataskala, anyway. I think Southwest Licking might have a little bit more of that housing than Licking Heights does, but for the most part, there's a big gap in the housing in this community that is between $250,000 and $400,000.
But I don't think that's in Pataskala, is it?
What?
That 300, what he's talking about, that number, that's actually not in Pataskala.
Oh,
Even though
you
it's
mean in
our
the
school
Southwest
district.
Licking stuff?
That's in
Harrison
Township, or
Oh,
in
okay.
Harrison Township.
Okay.
Yeah,
That goes back to the whole,
yeah. it's
where
not
is
in
Pataskala, what is
Yeah.
Pataskala?
So, good primer to where we're going, conversation,
Yeah.
we started it, we're gonna continue it, yes, BJ?
Just real quick, a couple people said with their nomination forms, could they have some time to think about it? So
Yeah.
if they turn them in tonight, can we follow up with them at the end of this week or whenever and say, hey, is there anybody else you guys would like to nominate? And one member who isn't here, reach out to her also and give her the opportunity to
Absolutely,
nominate.
if you're done, give it to us, if you're not, we'll bother you,
Okay.
to get it to us. And so what'll happen is, we'll present the list back to you, so we're not gonna talk to these people until we meet again. And we'll tell you what's going on, and we'll talk about the community survey at our next meeting, and then those meetings, or a small group meeting will happen after our second meeting. So the second meeting, we're gonna continue the conversation, we'll have more data to present to you in the maps of where growth can happen, where it can't happen, and we'll show you some scenarios, like, if we take the vacant land and the ag land and subtract stuff that's sensitive out, it's this many acres, and it could potentially, if it gets built out, be this many people. Or if we protect more of it, it'll look like this. So we'll start to show you what that looks like, and potentially how big this community could get. So, sound good? All right, what's the
Thanks,
score, BJ?
What's that?
It's
What's the score?
1-0 Capital.
One nothing, still 1-0? Okay.
End
Has
of
the second
first.
period started?
Yeah, just getting ready to start the second period.
Oh, we got all night.
The way these games have
The way
gone.
these games are going.
A lot of hockey being played. So, we'll see you on the 24th.